The first person to call me a liar at my father's funeral was my sister. She did it with a trembling hand pressed to her chest, mascara perfectly placed, voice cracking at exactly the right moment for the room to go still. "I don't know what kind of breakdown this is," Vanessa said, staring at me over the rim of her champagne glass, "but I did not steal your identity." A banker standing beside the condolence table lowered his eyes. My ex-husband froze near the church doors. My 10-year-old son looked up at me in confusion, still holding the folded funeral program with his grandfather's picture on it. And all I could think was this: if she hadn't stolen my identity, why was the bank calling me about accounts I never opened, debts I never made, and a life I didn't recognize under my own name? If you're enjoying stories about real-life challenges, personal growth, and unforgettable life lessons, consider subscribing to the channel. New stories are released regularly, and you won't want to miss the next one. My name is Lena Whitaker. I was 38 years old when my father died, a hospice nurse in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of woman who could sit beside a stranger taking their last breath but still couldn't say the right thing to her own family. I was divorced, raising my son Eli mostly on my own, and juggling school pickup, double shifts, and an ex-husband who never missed a chance to remind me that stability mattered in custody agreements. My father, Frank Whitaker, had been the only person who saw how close to drowning I really was. He knew I was behind on rent after my hours got cut the previous winter. He knew Eli's asthma medication wasn't cheap. He knew I still parked 3 blocks away from my apartment so the repo man wouldn't spot my car. He also knew something else, though I didn't understand it then. He knew Vanessa was desperate. At the funeral reception, she looked like grief in designer heels. 41, immaculate, polished, expensive from a distance and exhausted up close. Vanessa had always known how to perform composure. Even as kids, she could cry without smudging her face. She sold luxury real estate, lived in Mount Pleasant behind a gate and a code, and had spent most of our adult lives acting as though she'd escaped the Whitaker family while I'd somehow chosen to remain in it. But I knew her well enough to catch what others missed: the pulse beating too hard in her neck, the way she kept checking her phone, the tightness at the corners of her mouth when the banker spoke to me. "Ms. Whitaker," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for your loss. We had to flag several transfers after a discrepancy related to your verification credentials." "My what?" Vanessa stepped in before he could answer. "This is not the time." "It became the time when someone used my social security number," I said. People stopped pretending not to listen. Mark, my ex, moved closer with that concerned expression he used in court mediation sessions, the one that said Lena is emotional, maybe unstable, maybe not thinking clearly. He'd mastered concern as a weapon. "Maybe you should sit down," he murmured. "I'm not sitting down." The banker swallowed. There were documents submitted after Mr. Whitaker's death. Electronic signatures. A request to release funds from a life insurance payout and access a safety deposit box. My mouth went dry. I didn't sign anything. Vanessa gave a short laugh that wasn't a laugh at all. "Oh my God. Lena, are you hearing yourself? Dad died 3 days ago. And yet somehow my name is all over his accounts." Eli tugged my sleeve. "Mom?" I looked down at my son and saw fear spreading across his face, and shame hit me so hard I nearly lost the thread. This wasn't how children should meet the ugliest parts of adulthood, between a floral arrangement and a casserole tray, while grown people lied in church clothes. Vanessa softened instantly and crouched toward him. "Sweetheart, your mom's just upset." "Don't," I snapped. She straightened slowly, eyes going cold. "You always do this. You turn pain into theater." The old accusation landed because it wasn't new. In our family, Vanessa was discipline and sparkle, scholarships and sorority pictures. I was the difficult one, the girl who came home late, asked hard questions, married too young, divorced too publicly, and worked a job that left me smelling like antiseptic and fatigue. My father loved us both, but in ways that had never felt equal. Or maybe just never felt visible. Then the church receptionist touched my elbow and whispered, "There's a gentleman here from probate court." He says he has paperwork for the executor. Vanessa answered before I could. That would be me. The man frowned down at his file. Actually, ma'am, it says pending verification. And for the first time that day, I watched real fear move through my sister's face. That night, after I got Eli asleep on my couch bed, I sat at my kitchen table with the stack of copied documents the banker had reluctantly handed me. New credit cards in my name. A line of credit opened 6 weeks earlier. 2 late notices from a private lender in Atlanta. A request to transfer part of my father's insurance benefit to an account ending in numbers I didn't recognize. There was even an email address attached to the verification forms that looked almost like mine, one extra, one missing letter, the kind of fake you'd overlook if you weren't looking for harm. My hand shook so badly I had to put the papers down. Dad had only been dead 72 hours. In that time, someone had tried to move money, enter his safe deposit box, and bury me under debts I'd never touched. It had to be someone close enough to know his policy numbers, his passwords, his habits. Someone who knew my full legal name, my old address, even the security question based on our mother's maiden name. Someone like Vanessa. But suspicion is not proof. And in families like ours, proof mattered, because once you accused the wrong person, the wound never closed. At 11:14 p.m., my phone lit up with a text from Mark. You need to calm down. Today was inappropriate. If this spirals, I may need to revisit the custody schedule for Eli's sake. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. There it was. Not comfort. Not even curiosity. A threat. I typed back, "Were you at the bank with Vanessa before the funeral?" He didn't answer. The next morning, I drove to my father's house on Trad Street, the one he'd refused to sell even after every sensible person told him Charleston real estate had gone insane. The house was old brick, old money without the money, all creaky floors and stubborn history. Our mother had died there 15 years earlier from a fall on the back steps during a storm, and even now the place carried silence in its walls like it had learned to preserve pain. Vanessa's car was already outside. Of course it was. I found her in Dad's study, standing by the built-in shelves with a leather file box at her feet. "What are you doing?" I asked. She barely turned. "Organizing." "In whose authority?" "In the authority of the daughter who actually handled his affairs." I stepped farther into the room. My father's reading glasses were still on the desk beside a yellow legal pad covered in tiny, neat handwriting. The smell of his pipe tobacco lingered in the curtains. For one stupid second grief hit harder than anger, and I had to grip the doorframe. Vanessa saw it and mistook it for weakness. "You never wanted this responsibility, Lena." Dad knew that. Dad also knew how to spell my email address. She sighed. "You're spiraling because you're scared about money." "I get it. But turning me into some kind of criminal is low, even for you." "Then tell me why there are credit cards in my name." Her expression flickered. "Not guilt exactly. Calculation. I don't know anything about your finances." "My finances, no. My identity, maybe." She crossed her arms. "Be very careful." "With what?" "With accusing the only person who's trying to keep this family from falling apart." I laughed once, sharp and ugly. "This family fell apart years ago." The silence between us thickened. Then she said, quieter, "Dad was worried about Eli staying with you full-time." That one landed where she intended. "Why would you say that?" "Because it's true." "No, because you want me off balance." She stepped closer. "Mark talked to Dad. He had concerns." A rush of heat hit my face. "About what?" "Your schedule. Your apartment. The fact that Eli's missed school twice this semester." "You think people don't notice? You think being loving is the same as being stable?" For a second, I couldn't speak. Mark had promised our co-parenting mess stayed between us. Dad had never mentioned any concerns. But if the two of them had been talking, if Vanessa had been in those conversations too, then the ground under me was more dangerous than I'd realized. I moved toward the desk, needing distance from her, and my knee knocked a trash bin tipped on its side. Inside were torn strips of paper and a small broken plastic piece that looked like part of a charging cable or adapter. Vanessa saw me notice it and said too quickly, "The study's a mess." I looked up. She was lying. That afternoon I filed an identity theft report, froze my credit, and sat through a meeting with a probate attorney named Denise Halloran, who had kind eyes and a voice so precise it could have cut glass. "Do not speak to your sister alone if you can avoid it," Denise said, scanning the documents. "And do not underestimate whoever did this. This wasn't sloppy. It was targeted. Could she really get into Dad's accounts that fast? If she had access beforehand?" "Yes." I told her about the study, the file box, the weird confidence Vanessa had about being executor. Denise pulled a folder from her briefcase. "That's interesting," she said. "Because your father's will names Vanessa as executor only under an older version. The version filed last year names both daughters co-executors unless one is found to have acted in bad faith against the estate." I sat up. "Bad faith?" "Your father added that language himself." A chill moved through me. Dad had changed the will and never told us. "Why would he do that?" I asked. Denise looked at me for a moment. "Your father requested I hold a sealed letter unless a dispute arose after his death." My heart pounded once, hard. "Well," she said, sliding the envelope onto the desk between us, "I'd say a dispute has arisen." The letter was 3 pages in my father's handwriting. "If you are reading this, it means I was right to be worried." That was the first line. By the second, my hands were numb. Frank wrote that over the last year he had noticed irregularities in mailed statements, missing documents, and Vanessa asking unusually detailed questions about account structures, beneficiaries, and digital access. He admitted he had confronted her once, lightly, and she had cried, saying her husband Caleb was hiding debts from her. Dad said he wanted to believe her. He had helped her once. Then he regretted it. The third page stopped me cold. "I have reason to believe that if money pressure increases, someone close to me may attempt fraud after my death. Because I have spent too much of my life dismissing what I should have faced directly, I took steps to preserve the truth. If things go badly, ask Denise for the key labeled greenhouse." I looked up at Denise. "What does that mean?" She gave the smallest shrug. "He never told me. Dad didn't have a greenhouse. But he had built my mother one years ago, a tiny glass lean-to behind the house that we still called the greenhouse long after the roof cracked and the shelves rusted. I drove there so fast I barely remember the route. The key Denise gave me was taped inside the frame of one of Dad's old gardening books, exactly where the note said it would be. Out back, the little greenhouse sagged under jasmine vines and summer heat. The lock on the warped cabinet in the back corner stuck twice before it opened. Inside sat a metal cash box. And inside that box was a digital recorder, 3 labeled memory cards, and a yellow sticky note in Dad's handwriting. "She thinks I'm forgetful. I'm not." I sat down right there on the dirt floor. For a minute all I could hear was my own breathing and the distant churn of traffic from the harbor. My father, who could barely work the television remote, had secretly been recording people. Not everything, maybe. But enough to make him hide evidence outside the house. Enough to fear what one of us might do. I took the recorder to Denise's office. She transferred the files onto her computer while I watched the progress bar inch forward, every second feeling like a doorway opening onto some version of my family I was no longer sure I wanted to see. The first recordings were ordinary, Dad dictating reminders, reading account numbers aloud, testing audio. Then one file, dated 4 months earlier, began with the scrape of a chair and Vanessa's voice, low and tight. I said I'll pay it back. Dad answered, tired. You said that already. It's temporary. You took $30,000 from the home equity line without telling me, Vanessa. My entire body went rigid. She started crying, not loud, not theatrical, just enough for sympathy to enter the room. Caleb destroyed us, Dad. You know what that divorce is doing. He hid everything. I can't lose the house too. You forged my initials. Silence. Then, quietly, I was going to replace it before you noticed. I put a hand over my mouth. Denise kept listening, face unreadable. Dad's voice came again. And what happens when the next bill comes? Who do you become then? Vanessa said nothing for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. I become the daughter who stayed. The daughter who handled things. The daughter who didn't make a mess of her life. I felt that like a slap. Even in confession, she had found a way to drag me into it. The next recording was worse. It was Vanessa and Mark. I actually thought I'd misheard at first. I leaned forward, waiting for context to save me. It didn't. Mark's voice came through crisp as cut glass. If Lena's finances get reviewed during the custody check, it won't look good. Vanessa asked, would primary placement shift to you? It could. And then? A pause. Then I'd have leverage. You'd have room to settle with Caleb if the estate money clears. I stared at Denise. She stared back. My ex-husband. My sister. Sitting in my father's study making strategy out of my child. On the recording, Dad entered halfway through, footsteps abrupt. What exactly is going on in my house? Mark tried to smooth it over. Vanessa said Dad was misunderstanding. But the panic in the room was obvious. Papers moved. A chair tipped. Then Dad said the sentence that split my life clean in two. If either of you uses Lena's name, her son, or my death as leverage for money, I will make sure the whole truth comes out. The file ended there. I don't remember crying. I remember becoming very still. Shock has a strange shape. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it hardens. Denise closed the laptop. This is substantial. Substantial? My voice sounded far away. They were planning to use my son. She nodded once. Which means you're no longer dealing with family conflict alone. You're dealing with civil fraud, likely criminal exposure, and a potential custody manipulation scheme. I thought I would throw up. Instead, I called Mark. He answered on the third ring. What? I almost laughed at the naked hostility. He'd dropped the concerned tone now that he thought he'd cornered me. I heard the recording, I said. Silence. Then, what recording? The one in Dad's study. The one where you and Vanessa discuss using my finances in a custody review. Another silence, heavier this time. When he finally spoke, he sounded careful. Lena, whatever you think you heard. You sat in my father's house and made plans about my child. You are not stable enough to understand context right now. There it was again. That word. Stable. Did you love me at all, I asked, or did you just love winning? He exhaled like I was exhausting. This is why things became impossible with you. Everything is emotional. Everything is a trial. No, I said, suddenly calm. The trial is next month. I hung up before he could answer. The days that followed felt like living inside a storm cellar while a tornado circled overhead. Denise filed emergency motions with probate court. My bank initiated a fraud investigation. Family friends who had once adored Vanessa began calling in hushed voices, suddenly remembering odd things, mail rerouted, errands offered, signatures witnessed but not examined closely. And then came the thing I hadn't expected, memory. Not evidence. Memory. I kept replaying childhood scenes with new eyes. Vanessa taking my report card before Dad got home and helping explain it. Vanessa opening my college acceptance letter before I saw it. Vanessa borrowing my clothes, my stories, even once my idea for a school fundraiser and then smiling when everyone praised her for it. Little thefts. Identity in practice before it was ever paperwork. Still, none of that made her a monster. It made her a person who had spent her life confusing possession with love. I found that out when she came to my apartment alone. It was raining. Eli was at a friend's house. Vanessa stood in the doorway without an umbrella, hair damp, mascara gone, looking less like my glamorous older sister than the scared girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms after Mom died. "I need to talk to you," she said. "You need a lawyer. Please." Against every sensible instinct, I let her in. She stood in the middle of my tiny living room and looked around, the thrift store lamp, the school shoes by the couch, the inhaler on the counter, and something in her face shifted. Maybe pity. Maybe shame. Maybe the realization that my life was not messy because I was careless. It was messy because it was hard. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said. "People always say that when it's already far." She flinched. "I used your name for the cards." "Yes. I thought I could float it for a month, maybe 2. Then Dad died sooner than anyone expected, and everything sped up. Caleb froze accounts. The divorce attorney wanted payment. I panicked. So you buried me instead." "I was going to fix it." "With what money?" She looked away. "That's what I thought." Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time in my life they didn't move me. "You have no idea what I was carrying." "You have no idea either," I shot back. "You always thought because my life looked smaller, it hurt less." She sank onto the edge of the chair. "Dad always loved you differently." The sentence stunned me. I let the silence stretch. She laughed bitterly through tears. "You're surprised? He worried about you. Protected you. Excused you. I got the standards. You got the softness." I stared at her, feeling something old and rotten crack open. "You think being the child people worry about is a privilege?" "I think being the child they forgive is." For a moment we were not two grown women in an apartment. We were girls again, motherless and raw, each holding a distorted map of the same house. Then she whispered, "I didn't know he recorded us." And I believed her. Not because she deserved belief, but because terror had finally stripped performance from her. She looked wrecked. Human. Guilty. "There's more," she said. I went cold. "What more?" It wasn't just me and Mark. The second twist came like a match dropped in gasoline. According to Vanessa, Caleb, her estranged husband, had been pressuring her for months to secure access to anticipated inheritance funds because he'd invested heavily in a project that collapsed. He had threatened to expose her early misuse of Dad's equity line unless she cooperated. Mark, who represented one of Caleb's business associates in a side matter, learned about the financial chaos through that connection. Mark then floated the idea that if my financial standing looked shaky during our pending custody review, he could push for primary placement of Eli and use that pressure to force me into selling the one thing Dad had promised me informally for years, his house. "Wait," I said. "Why would Mark care about Dad's house?" Vanessa swallowed. "Because Caleb wanted the property. Developers approached him twice. He thought if you were under enough pressure, you'd sign whatever was put in front of you." I felt the room tilt. Dad's old house wasn't just sentimental. The land under it had become wildly valuable. I had always assumed Vanessa wanted cash. I hadn't realized men around her wanted the address. "Dad knew?" I asked. He knew enough to stop trusting people. That night I didn't sleep. I sat beside Eli's bed listening to him breathe and thinking about greed, not the flashy kind, but the slow-blooded kind that enters a family in reasonable shoes. The kind that says, "I'm only borrowing. I'm only surviving. I'm only doing what I have to." Until suddenly people are using a child as leverage and a dead man's house as prey. The hearings were set 3 weeks apart, but the county judge allowed overlapping evidentiary consideration because of the custody implications. Charleston is beautiful from the outside, all pastel facades and iron balconies, but its courtrooms are fluorescent and unforgiving. Truth looks less poetic under office lighting. Vanessa arrived with counsel. Mark arrived with a folder and a face like stone. Caleb was subpoenaed and looked furious to be there. I wore the only navy blazer I owned and held on to calm like it was a railing over open water. When the recordings were played, no one looked glamorous. No one looked strategic. They looked small. Vanessa cried openly during the first file. Mark kept objecting until the judge warned him to sit down and let the evidence speak. Caleb's attorney tried to distance him, but a chain of messages and financial records tied him to the pressure campaign surrounding the property. The forged signatures, the credit cards, the fake email variations, piece by piece, the story they had built around me collapsed under the one thing they hadn't planned for, my father's suspicion. Then Denise introduced a final recording we hadn't discussed in open court yet. It was dated 9 days before Dad died. His voice was weaker than in the others. If you're hearing this, Lena, I waited too long to say things plainly. The courtroom went silent in a way I'll never forget. I spent years trying to keep peace by avoiding conflict. That was a mistake. Peace without truth is just quiet fear. Vanessa learned to perform strength because I rewarded appearances. Lena learned to survive without asking because I praised endurance instead of helping. I failed both my daughters in different ways. But if harm comes after I'm gone, the house on Trad Street is to pass to Lena Whitaker outright, not because she needs rescuing, but because she knows how to stay when staying is hard. And because Eli deserves one place in this world that greed cannot reach. I broke then. Not loudly. Just enough to bow my head and let the words pass through me. Across the room, Vanessa covered her face. The judge ruled by late afternoon. Emergency protective measures remained in place. Probate control shifted fully out of Vanessa's hands. The fraudulent accounts were referred for criminal investigation. The custody petition Mark had been quietly preparing was dead on arrival, and the judge noted serious concerns regarding the father's judgment and good faith. Mark didn't look at me when we left the courtroom. Vanessa did. In the hallway, under a framed photograph of the Charleston harbor, she said my name the way she used to when we were young and one of us had broken something we couldn't fix. Lena. I turned. I am sorry, she said. Not polished. Not strategic. Just ruined. I believed that too. And I hated that I did. Because forgiveness is not the same thing as absolution. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't repair credit reports, or give back trust, or take your child's fear out of his eyes. It only decides whether pain gets to own the rest of the story. Weeks later, I visited her once before she entered a court-ordered treatment program tied to a plea agreement Denise had helped shape. Some people thought I was insane for supporting that outcome over a scorched earth trial. Maybe they were right. But prison would punish her. It would not explain her. And I had spent enough of my life inside unexplained damage. We sat across from each other in a small conference room smelling like coffee and bleach. She still would have left us, you know, Vanessa said suddenly. I frowned. Who? Mom. Before she died. She stared at the table. I found letters once. She was unhappy. Dad begged her to stay. I think after that he became terrified of losing anything else. That's why he controlled money. That's why he needed order. I absorbed that quietly. Another family truth, arriving too late to save anyone, but maybe still in time to make sense of them. He should have told us, I said. He should have told a lot of people a lot of things. We both smiled at that, sad and tired. Before I left, she said, take care of the house. I will. And Lena? Yeah? Don't turn it into a shrine. That one almost made me laugh. By autumn, Eli and I had moved into Dad's old place. The porch needed work. The upstairs bathroom still groaned like it resented modern plumbing. But the house held. So did we. Eli picked the back bedroom because he said it smelled like books and rain. I planted herbs where Mom's greenhouse had leaned. I kept nursing, took extra certification courses, and for the first time in years stopped living one bad week away from collapse. Mark's custody threats faded into supervised politeness. Caleb vanished into his own legal wreckage. Vanessa wrote me letters from treatment, sometimes defensive, sometimes tender, often honest in ugly ways neither of us had ever managed before. Healing, I learned, is not a clean narrative arc. It is paperwork and therapy and awkward holidays and deciding, over and over, not to become what hurt you. One evening, months after the court case ended, Eli found an old cassette in a drawer in Dad's study. "What's this?" I took it from him, smiling. "A recording tape. Ancient technology. Can we hear it?" We found an old player in a closet and got it working after some effort. The tape crackled, then my mother's laughter filled the room, young, bright, alive. Dad said something we couldn't make out, and she laughed harder. Eli grinned like he'd discovered treasure. I stood there with one hand over my mouth, listening to two dead people be ordinary. Not tragic. Not symbolic. Just in love for one small captured minute. That, more than court or money or even justice, was what finally loosened something in me. A family can carry betrayal and still contain love. A parent can fail you and still try, too late, to tell the truth. A sister can wound you in ways that alter your life and still remain part of the map of who you are. None of that excuses harm. But it does mean the story is bigger than the worst thing someone did. My father's recordings exposed lies, yes. They protected me when I didn't know protection was coming. But what stayed with me most was his final lesson: silence does not keep a family together. It only teaches everyone to perform their pain in separate rooms. The real inheritance wasn't the house. It was the courage to stop pretending. And once the truth had been spoken out loud, messy, humiliating, irreversible, we finally had a chance to build something more honest from the wreckage. On the first anniversary of Dad's death, Eli and I sat on the back steps at sunset. The air smelled like salt and cut grass. Church bells rang somewhere downtown. I watched my son lean his head against my shoulder, and for the first time in a very long while, the future didn't feel like something circling above me with its claws out. It felt earned. Fragile, maybe. But earned. If this story resonated with you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoy meaningful stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more.